In a dry, sunlit village nestled between two winding rivers there lived a young farmer named Kabir. His family had tilled the land for generations, and though the soil was rough and the crops modest, it had always been enough to live by. Kabir, however, was different. While others found comfort in tradition, he often found himself staring beyond the horizon, wondering what life might be like beyond the fields and fences. Ever since he was a boy, he had dreams, vivid, restless dreams of creating something new, building something that was his. He didn't know what exactly. All he knew was that working in the heat day after day, planting and harvesting the same way as his father and grandfather before him, wasn't enough for him. But every time he brought it up, the village would respond the same way. This is how life is here, or the outside world is not for people like us. His father would sigh and say, "Kabir, stop chasing clouds. You're lucky to have land to farm." So Kabir stayed, and over time the fire inside him that once burned so brightly dimmed to a faint glow. As the years passed, he began to drift through his days. He would wake up, work the land, return home, and fall asleep. But there was no joy in his steps, no pride in his calloused hands. He felt like a machine repeating commands. The village noticed the change, but no one asked him about it. Everyone just assumed he was growing up, settling down, becoming responsible. But Kabir wasn't becoming anything. He was simply fading. One morning, after a sleepless night, Kabir found himself walking aimlessly toward the edge of the village. There was a bend in the path where the river curved, and a massive banyan tree offered shade and silence. He sat beneath it, elbows on knees, and whispered a question he hadn't dared say aloud before. What if I'm meant for more, but I never find out? The breeze carried no answer, only the rustling of leaves. As Kabir sat beneath the banyan tree, lost in the noise of his own thoughts, an old voice broke the silence. "You look like a man searching for something that doesn't want to be found." Startled, Kabir turned and saw an elderly man seated a few feet away on a stone. He wore a faded kurta, his beard long and silver, and his eyes carried the calm of someone who had seen many seasons come and go. "I didn't hear you come," Kabir said. The old man chuckled softly. "I've been coming to this tree for years. Most don't notice me, but I noticed you." Kabir looked away, unsure of what to say. The man continued, "Your eyes are full of questions, not the kind people ask out loud, the kind that keep you awake at night." Kabir nodded slowly. "I feel like I'm walking in circles. Everyone says I should be grateful, that I have land, a home, work. But inside, I feel like I'm losing myself." The old man picked up a stick and began drawing shapes in the dirt. "Let me tell you a story," he said. "Many years ago, there was a young woman named Mira. She lived by the mountains and dreamed of becoming a healer. But her village believed women should only cook and clean. So Mira buried her dream and lived as they told her. Years passed. She had children, a family. But inside, a part of her always felt lost." Kabir leaned in, curious. "One day," the man continued, "a traveler came to the village, sick and exhausted. The elders ignored him, but Mira tended to him in secret, using herbs she had studied quietly over the years. The traveler recovered, word spread, people began to seek her help. Slowly, Mira became the village healer, not because she waited for permission, but because she listened to what never stopped calling her." Kabir was silent. The man's voice had softened. "You see, being lost isn't always bad. Sometimes it means you've outgrown the map others gave you. You're searching for your own." Kabir stared out at the river, his chest tight, but his mind a little clearer. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel ashamed of his restlessness. He felt human. That evening, Kabir returned home, but something inside him had shifted. His feet walked the same dusty paths, his hands still pulled weeds from the same soil, but his thoughts, they were somewhere new. The story of Mira echoed in his mind. She hadn't waited for the world to accept her dream. She simply began living it, quietly, patiently, until it could no longer be ignored. Kabir thought about the things he used to love as a boy, building things with scraps, sketching new ideas in the dirt, imagining machines that could make farming easier. He had locked those pieces of himself away for so long, convincing himself they didn't matter. But now he wondered, what if those parts were the truest parts of him? Late that night, as the rest of the village slept, Kabir sat outside under the same stars he had always seen. Only now, they didn't look as far away. He found an old notebook he had once used in school and opened it. The pages were blank. The days that followed were not filled with dramatic changes. Kabir still woke up early, fed the animals, worked the fields. But something had awakened inside him, and it refused to fall back asleep. Each evening after the chores were done, he returned to that notebook. He began sketching tools, simple ones at first, ways to carry water more easily, methods to reduce strain while planting. He had no formal training in mechanics, but what he lacked in schooling, he made up for in observation. He watched how nature worked, how the river curved to flow easier, how birds used wind instead of fighting it. Slowly, he started experimenting. One day, he fashioned a crude irrigation system using old metal pipes and spare wood. It wasn't perfect, but it reduced his workload by hours. His father, who had grown skeptical of Kabir's quiet sketches, began to take notice. "You made this?" he asked, brows raised. Kabir nodded, unsure how his father would react. After a moment of silence, the old man said, "It works better than anything I've used in years." Kabir didn't need praise, but those words stayed with him. News spread through the village. Other farmers came to see the invention. Some laughed at it, but others were curious. One neighbor asked if Kabir could help him build something similar. Another offered him scrap materials. For the first time, Kabir felt not just seen, but needed. Still, the journey wasn't easy. There were failures, devices that broke, days where nothing seemed to work. But Kabir no longer saw these as signs to stop. He saw them as signs he was trying. And deep down, he remembered what the old man by the banyan tree had said. Being lost doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're searching for the path that's meant to be yours. Kabir was beginning to find that path, not in a rush of success, but in the quiet rhythm of doing what felt true. Weeks turned into months, and Kabir's quiet revolution continued. His designs became more refined, and his confidence began to take root, not the loud, boastful kind, but the steady, humble certainty of someone who had finally begun living in alignment with who they truly were. More villagers came to him, not just to borrow tools or materials, but to ask questions about how he learned to build, how he kept going despite the failures, how he had known it would work. And every time, Kabir gave them the same answer. "I didn't know it would work, I just knew I had to try." He began teaching younger boys and girls how to think differently, how to notice small problems and imagine new solutions. For many of them, this was the first time anyone had encouraged them to create instead of just follow. One evening, the village council invited Kabir to speak. They had decided to set aside a plot of land where he could teach and build, a space where young people could come not just to learn farming, but to innovate. Kabir stood before the small crowd, hesitant at first. Public speaking had never been his strength, but as he looked into the eyes of his neighbors, he realized something important. These were the same people who once told him to stop chasing clouds. They hadn't changed. He had. "I used to think feeling lost was a weakness," he said. "But now I understand. It was a message. It was life's way of telling me I wasn't where I belonged yet. And that's okay, because the journey to finding yourself isn't supposed to be easy, it's supposed to be real." The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was full of understanding, full of the quiet kind of respect that doesn't need applause to be felt. Kabir smiled, not to impress anyone, but because for the first time in his life he truly meant it. Years later, Kabir still lived in the same village, still worked with his hands, and still spent his evenings beneath the banyan tree. But everything around him and within him had transformed. He was no longer the boy who wandered through life with a quiet ache in his chest. He had become a man who embraced uncertainty, who turned questions into blueprints and restlessness into action. What once felt like a burden, his hunger for something more, had become the very force that shaped his life. The field where he once plowed alone was now filled with laughter, young voices, and experiments that sometimes failed and sometimes sparked wonder. He watched as students made mistakes, learned from them, and stood back up, just like he once had. And as Kabir looked at them, at their curiosity, their courage, he felt a deep, quiet gratitude for the day he had dared to ask himself a question beneath this very tree. Because that's where the change began. It didn't start with a plan or a mentor or a perfect moment. It started with a single feeling, being lost. And now, dear listener, maybe you felt it too. The weight of uncertainty, the ache of misalignment, the quiet voice that says there has to be more. So let me ask you one final question. If getting lost is what leads us to